It's about the restoration of our republic. We want to educate, encourage, enable the power. We stand for integrity, honesty, self-reliance, self-defense, and most importantly, no compromise on our foundational principles. This is America's Voice Now.
Find America's Voice Now on Facebook and at americasvoicenow.org. Here's Michael Evans.
Good morning, America. You're listening to America's Voice Now. My name is Michael Evans. I'm your host this morning. We're going to cover a broad range of topics, starting out with Syria and the recent revelations that there was use of a chemical weapon over there, and how not only this government but also the international community is adopting this as an excuse to attack that nation. While I'm not going to take sides either way in terms of which side is right, wrong, or otherwise, the issue here remains that what this will really truly be is just one more attempt to refocus the American attention span away from the plethora of scandals that have literally surrounded this administration. And we're going to evaluate what this means. And of course, the danger is that we'll get involved in another quagmire over there, much like we did in Vietnam, much like we did in Afghanistan, much like we have been involved in Iraq, and many, many, many other countries. Folks, if you have no idea how many nations we're actually involved in conflicts in, you really need to be paying more attention. Our second topic this morning will be the NSA Daily Hotspot. As you're aware, there are a number of brand new revelations that have hit the airwaves this morning, and we're going to talk a little bit about those because there are a couple of them that you need to be aware of, namely the fact that they have been spying on the United Nations, and in addition to that, they have a program actually called Love Int. Now, Int is always short in the intelligence community for intelligence, and so it's called Love Intelligence. And these are individual users or administrators within the NSA who have been utilizing for the system for their own purposes of monitoring their significant others, their spouses, their lovers, what have you, basically tracking them and monitoring all of their communications to see if they're cheating on them and things like that. I guess what it really comes down to is if this, now they say it's only once in a great while, but when they have actually a nickname for it, you know that this is a widespread and deeply embedded practice. And if individuals can surreptitiously abuse this system for their own personal abuses, just imagine the actual capabilities of this under a guided hand. It says a lot. DoD Section 3 or Segment 3. DoD. They've recently come out, or what's been revealed through a Freedom of Information Act, is a new policy or a new training program by the DoD that is labeling the founders as terrorists and extremists. And I got to tell you, that kind of thing and that kind of thinking and that kind of talk is the type of thing that really just burns my shorts. We are a nation that, in other words, what they're trying to do is point to folks who have a patriotic mindset here in the United States now, and set up the public opinion that these people that these people in our past were traitors. And I got to tell you, if they believe that they're traitors, then what do they think they're doing supporting the result of their treason? I mean, it's unconscionable, and you really need to be aware of it. And our fourth and final segment is the Obama executive order not to deport illegal aliens if they have minor children in their custody. Now, I got to tell you, that is a blatant violation of law. And what we have now is a scenario where the chief lawmaker is instructing the government repeatedly to break the law. And when that happens, all rule of law is broken, and we are nothing short of a dictatorship. Lawlessness equals dictatorship. Lawlessness coupled with dictatorial executive orders, even more so. Nothing can make this right. No excuse can be given, and no defense can be made for indefensible action on the part of this administration. They are violating our law blatantly and openly. And I tell you, we have reached the point where we absolutely must take action against what's going on in our nation. Every day, it's another level of treason, another expose, another example. And the examples at this point are so thick and so heavy that it's impossible to believe that there is not a willful and intended direction for all of this. All right, let's get on Syria. You know, Syria had a chemical attack, or what is widely believed to be a chemical attack, last week. Literally hundreds and hundreds were killed, including a lot of children. Essentially what happened is when these bombs started falling, they all ran for their basements, which would be the normal cover place. The problem is that when you're talking about chemical weapons, the weight of that is greater than the weight of oxygen and air. It goes to the low places, and those people that were holed up in their basements looking for protection actually became the victims. No one really knows at this point who dropped the chemical weapon. There's contention, of course. Assad, the Syrian leader, says it wasn't him. The rebels say it was. He says it was the rebels. The rebels say it wasn't us. Nobody else is involved, so somebody's got to be lying. And at this point, you know, Obama has violated his red line commitment and promise a number of times. And so, of course, the world is now watching to see if he's nothing but a windbag of hot air or if he's actually going to do something. The UN inspectors have been trying to get in there to identify and verify whether or not there was actually a chemical attack. And to make matters worse, they were hit by sniper fire yesterday. And so it's hard for them to even get in and find out what the truth is. Assad did bomb the same area the following day with regular, traditional, conventional weapons. And so the fear is that a lot of the evidence that would have been available is now going to be covered up by virtue of the other the secondary bombing, which would have, you know, eliminated perhaps a lot of the potential to find shell fragments, to find dust laying about that they could scrape up and test for chemical weaponry use, and so forth and so on. So essentially, there probably won't be any forensic proof as to who did this. Ultimately, what it comes down to is that the United States and the UK are sending international or forces over there. We've sent a bunch of destroyers. The UK has announced that they are sending a serious a contingent over there. And what we're looking at here is the opening gambit, or the shot across the bow, if you will, of one more area where we are going to incorporate international wrath for involving ourselves in another scenario. Now, I'm not going to take a position one way or the other on who's right, who's wrong, and whether we should actually be there. We do know that in large part, a lot of our involvement already to this date has been done surreptitiously, i.e. Benghazi and the smuggling of weapons into Syria for the use of rebels. My concern, and yours should be too, is that the rebels here are also the same al-Qaeda we're fighting in other areas. And we've seen that to be the case, and we saw it to be the case in Egypt when it first occurred there over a year ago. We supported them there. We supported them in Libya, and now they are in control. So here we are on one front over in Afghanistan and Iraq fighting against al-Qaeda, while on the other hand, supporting them and fostering their winning of a conflict in two other countries, namely Libya and Egypt. And then when they win, we can't have it both ways, folks. Our foreign policy is such a disastrous mishmash of these knee-jerk reactions. There's no coordinated, unified policy. And you cannot run a country that is allegedly run by the rule of law and is based and focused upon the concepts and the precepts that we always will support and help and defend a country that is being oppressed, while simultaneously helping the oppressors in other areas. I mean, you cannot have that kind of a policy. What we have is a complete and utter breakdown in a unified, singular policy. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what fosters the hatred of the United States overseas. You see, if we don't have a policy of consistency, then we are open to criticism, and we leave that door wide open. In fact, it's not a door, it's barn doors. We have constantly, and especially over the course of the last 20 years or so, between the Bush administration and the Obama administration, we have left ourselves wide open to being kicked around by folks who point out the absurdity of our policies and the lack of consistency and continuity in them. So Hagel, who's speaking on a trip from Indonesia, he declined to discuss U.S. military options under consideration, but he did say the United States is looking at all options, including the situation in Syria. We're working with allies and international community. Same nonsense we always hear, a non-answer. We're looking at all of our options. Not everything's on the table, blah, 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 blah. No action will be taken without the international community's approval, the framework of legal justification, blah, 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 blah. Well, Russia comes out and says any attack on Syria without an international mandate from the UN would be considered an international violation and an unlawful act. So you got to realize that, you see, this isn't just a question of smacking a hornet's nest in Syria or in Afghanistan or in Libya or in Egypt. This is a case now of smacking a hornet's nest in Russia, because when Russia disagrees with our policy, they have actually the clout to do something about it, because they have a seat on the Security Council in the United Nations. In fact, they don't have one, they have two. And so, thanks to Roosevelt, by the way. And so what we have is a conflict now that is where the disparity between the nation's largest superpowers, the globe's largest superpowers, is broadening on a daily basis. The chasm is growing every single day between the policies of the United States, which are becoming more and more frenetic, almost pathological in a sense. We constantly are flip-flopping back and forth without any real united front on any one position. And, of course, that's a dangerous place for a nation to be, especially a nation that is considered to be, at least by ourselves at any rate, the sole superpower left on the planet. In other words, if the police themselves are arbitrary and capricious, how do you then trust them? And that, ladies and gentlemen, sums it up in a nutshell for all of the positions about everything that we look at in our current society today. We cannot trust our police because we see example after example after example of militarization, abuse, this mentality that it's us against them and those types of things. Well, guess what? The world views the United States in the same exact format. There's no difference whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. They view us as arbitrary and capricious. Arbitrary meaning we support anybody as long as they're our friend, and irrespective of how dirty or corrupt or criminal they may be. And capricious in the sense that we then abuse the power that we have to pummel and penalize and prosecute and persecute those who stand against us. And this isn't just an international policy. You see, what's important to note here is that we see that same policy being applied domestically. How do we see that being applied domestically? Well, we see patented, plain, and obvious abuse by the IRS. We see a DoD that classifies our founders as extremists and terrorists. We see our military veterans being decried as extremists and terrorists in waiting. I mean, we see our NSA spying on our own people. We see these administrative agencies that, like the EPA, are so out of control that they have turned the wrath of their agencies against the American people. In other words, they're no longer there as a group to provide a functional backstop that or even a protective arm to support. I mean, the original concept for the EPA was that it was supposed to be an organization and an agency that would go out there and protect the environment. Now it has become a weapon of mass destruction in the hands of this and previous administrations. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the problem. That's where government has now become arbitrary and capricious, domestically as well as internationally. And you see, we may put up with it here because it's our government. But internationally, they've had it. They don't care. Their attitude is, at this point, you're an oppressor. That's how they view us in Iraq. That's how they view us in Afghanistan. That's how they view us in Libya. That's how they view us in Egypt. I mean, it's everywhere, folks. Everywhere. And what we're doing is creating a situation where ultimately we will have zero credibility internationally. And that falls back directly onto the shoulders of this administration. Because, and the long-term ramifications of that are critical. Because we are never, it's going to take us literally decades, even if tomorrow morning the United States of America turned around and completely changed its mantra and said, we are going to live under the Constitution which our nation was founded upon. Let's just play this out hypothetically as a scenario for a moment. And all of these administrative agencies, all of these abusive oppressors who are, between the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, the military, all of this stuff stopped. And we focused in exclusively, as our founders said, friends to all, allies to none, and that we kept ourselves out of international conflict. It would take us literally decades before the world came to grips with that, acknowledged it, accepted it, and began to back off from their anger at us. And truth is, 50, 70, 100 years from now, they'll still be decrying the tyranny years of the United States. The tyrannical window, the era of tyranny. You see, global tyranny, I mean. You see, once done like this, actions like this cannot be withdrawn. And it doesn't matter how hard you attempt to try to make up for it. I mean, we can see this in the example of slavery in the United States of America, right? It's 150 or 200 years dead. And yet, the pain, the ramifications, the problems associated with that are still lingering. And they're lingering now that, to the extent that the pendulum has actually swung to the other extreme, and we're now seeing that, everyone is bending over backwards to create this overage of political correctness and recompense for the years of slavery. And honestly, I mean, you're not responsible for it. I'm not. Our families aren't. Our grandparents, our great-grandparents, even our great-great-grandparents weren't responsible for this. And yet we, as a group today, as a nation today, are left to pay those prices. Don't forget, we're still dealing with the ramifications of Iraq back when Jimmy Carter was in power in the 80s, in the 70s, when Iraq turned and went from a propped up dictator to a theocracy. So use that as your example and your guide. Remember that once we correct position and correct or change or things go so far out of control in a foreign nation that they boot us out and then they become a sworn enemy, this stuff doesn't go away. And generations are raised with hatred, and therefore this stuff doesn't go away until that generation and the 2 or 3 subsequent generations behind them expire. So what's important to realize is that irrespective of what happens in Syria, the United States as a nation loses. Because no matter what we do, we are condemned. If we go over there and we take action, we are inserting ourselves in a situation that, quite frankly, we have no place being. The United Nations, the original concept of the United Nations was that everyone would contribute and participate. But when action was taken like that, it would be a United Nations security force who would go in. Now, we already know the results of that. We've seen that in Africa, where the United Nations has gone in, and that group of blue hats is so corrupt. I mean, they have no leadership. It is a debacle. Everywhere the United Nations goes, they burn their reputation and the reputation of all the global powers collectively, simultaneously. So we can't count on that. And if we take action as a collective minor group or minority group out of the Security Council, and we don't have the approval of Russia and the approval of China, then we are considered as acting as the usurper. Even with an approach that is international in its scope, we lose. And if we take no action, that would be the opposite side of the fence, right? Then we're accused of allowing, by our own sworn enemies, they throw out the mantra that you didn't help when you could have, and therefore you're the enemy again. So either way, we become the enemy. And this is a result of literally 100 years worth of violation of the basic tenet of friends to all, allies to none. And you can call that and say that's that would be an anti-imperialist policy, and it is. But there are others out there who would say, well, that's just American protectionism. You can't have that. We've got it. This is a global. You know what? I'm tired of the globalization talk. We may be a part of the globe, but we're not. We don't run the globe, and the more imperialistically we act, the worse we make things. That's what I'm trying to say. We act as imperialists, and when it's recognized and it's exposed, then we have no plausible defense. In other words, we are defenseless, and our actions are indefensible, because either way we go, we're wrong. So, even when you're right, you're wrong, so to speak. And that is as a result of 100 years of imperialism. The focus of the United States should be first and foremost on dealing with the United States. First and foremost, taking care of our own situations, locking down our own borders, taking care of our own infrastructure needs, dealing with our own economic conditions first. We cannot be an imperialist who is corrupted from the inside, because we see the results of that. Look at Napoleon. Look at Rome. There are thousands. Look at Russia. Look at Hitler. I mean, there are literally so many examples that we can't even begin to really discuss them, because we'd be here for the rest of the morning just naming them. Imperialism always ends in a negative for the nation and for the people. Not only the people of the nation, but the people who they are imperialistically usurping power from or abusing. And that's just the nature of it, folks. That's why France and England and Spain were so hated in the early years of the United States of America. All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to top on our second, the NSA Daily Hotspot, and the absolute betrayal of all of the principles of lawfulness in the United States, and how this is a situation that has gone completely to the dogs. This is an important issue, and I got to tell you, it's really out of control. We'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to America's Voice Now. You can find us on the web at americasvoicenow.org and facebook.com/America's Voice Now. Stick with us. We'll be back in just a moment.